You want to say it at the same time?
Yes.
I don't want to.
Okay, that's fine. Well, we can just do it for fun.
Okay. Welcome to Kathy and Celeste's YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't want that to be in the video. Welcome.
Welcome back.
My name is Kathy.
My name is Celeste.
We're back with a story. We were gone for a little bit. I'm sorry about that, but we're back. And today Celeste is going to be telling me a super scary, super mysterious story. So buckle in and get ready to hear something weird.
So today I'm going to tell you the story about Teresita Basa, the ghost that solved her own murder.
Oh.
Or did she?
Oh.
Right? There's a lot of aspects to this case that are sad, mysterious, questionable, and we'll get into it. And I'll tell you everything that I know about this case.
Okay.
On the evening of February 21st, 1977, the Chicago Fire Department was called to Pine Grove Avenue Apartments because neighbors of apartment 15B had noticed that there was smoke coming out from underneath the door in one of the 15B apartment. The fire department arrives. They get into apartment 15B, which was on the 15th floor. They go in and they discover that the fire was actually coming from the bedroom. It wasn't coming from the kitchen, which is where house fires normally come from.
Yeah, like the oven.
Yeah, the oven. Maybe the microwave. I guess it's not super uncommon for fires to start in other rooms, but I would think.
We're not firefighters.
I
don't know.
We're not firefighters. Yeah, so they go in and they see that the fire is actually coming from the bedroom, and they walk in. They can't really see a whole lot because there is a lot of smoke in the air. Mm-hmm. And so they're kind of walking around trying to figure out exactly what the source of the fire is. And they find that the source of the fire is actually coming from a mattress that had been flipped over and also a pile of clothing. So they put the fire out with their hose, and then after that they cleared out all the smoke by opening the windows. Mm-hmm. And once they did, one of the firefighters walked over to the mattress and he had his flashlight on, and he was kind of looking around, and he could see that poking out from underneath the mattress was a human knee. And so he was like, this is concerning. So he lifted it up and he found the body of a woman named Teresita Basa, a 47-year-old woman. She was completely naked. Her legs were kind of like splayed out, and she had a knife that had been buried into her chest all the way to the handle.
Oh.
Yeah.
That seems like such a humiliating way to murder someone. Like just splayed out naked on fire with a knife stabbed into the chest.
Yeah, it seems very very
humiliating.
Humiliating, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so more about Teresita. She was born in the Philippines in 1929, and she moved to Chicago in the 70s, and she actually moved to Chicago to get her master's degree in music. She really loved music. Yeah, it was like a huge part of her life. And she was actually known for giving piano lessons to some of the kids in the neighborhood, which is really cute.
That's so cute.
Yeah. During the day, she worked as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she basically, she had her day job, and then she had her dream of music. I just want to give a summarized version of Edgewater Hospital because it has its own story. I thought that I should include it because it's really interesting.
Okay.
So Frank Sinatra actually visited Edgewater Hospital.
Oh.
It was considered like a luxury hospital in the 1930s and the 1940s.
Oh, wow.
Like they had a whole pool installed at the hospital. They had like a spa. It was for rich people basically. A bunch of well-known people had actually been born at the hospital. For example, Hillary Clinton was born at the hospital.
Whoa.
Yeah, and also John Wayne Gacy.
Ooh.
He was born at the hospital, and he also performed at the hospital as a clown for the sick children.
Ooh, that's so creepy. Something about that just makes my skin crawl.
Yeah. And we'll probably get into that case someday, but not today.
Not today.
So I don't know all the details about the hospital story, but basically the hospital had a huge fraud scandal where they would lure senior citizens and people from the houseless community into the hospital with like cigarettes and basically like home care. And then they would perform unnecessary medical procedures on them.
Why?
They were not doing well financially, and so I think they had the city send them money so they could continue being in business, I think.
Oh, kind of like, look at all the things we're doing. We need more funding because we have so many important surgeries to do and stuff like that.
I think so, okay. Yeah. There's this whole podcast, and it's called If the Walls Could Talk, and that's actually where I got most of the information from this case. But the podcast is all about Edgewater Hospital and the scandal that took place.
Oh.
And then the bonus episodes are the episodes about Teresita. I would definitely recommend listening to that if you're interested in that scandal.
Ooh.
It's super interesting, but it's a wild story. We'll link it below as well. So back to Teresita. Here's a picture of her. She's beautiful.
Oh, she's so beautiful. I love her smile.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so sad that she got murdered.
I know, it's horrible.
In such a horrible way.
I know. But yeah, she was super well liked, and she was really friendly. Like, she had a ton of friends. She was a little bit shy. Like, at her apartment building, she didn't really talk to a lot of the people that lived there. And this is important. Every day at the hospital where she worked, she would sit in the same spot at lunch, and she would hum and sing some of the same tunes.
Mm-hmm.
And people noticed that about her. Everybody liked her. Everyone thought she was so cute. Yeah, and she even hosted parties a lot. Even though she didn't drink, she had a lot of parties.
Oh.
Yeah. In fact, her mother came to one of these parties that she was hosting.
She visited her from the Philippines?
Yeah, from the Philippines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and she was like, you seem really happy. It seems like I'm probably not going to see you for a long time, so I just want to give you some jewelry. Every time you look at it, you can think of me.
Aww.
So she gave her a pearl cocktail ring, and she also gave her a jade pendant necklace.
Those sound like pretty pricey gifts.
Yeah, probably. And her parents were actually aristocrats. Aristocrats in the Philippines. And Teresita was their only child, so they really loved her a lot. And it makes sense that her mom was like, I'm gonna miss you, so please have these gifts.
Yeah, totally.
You know, Teresita was also single, and this was intentional because 10 years prior, she had been with a Chicago man, and he actually flew out to the Philippines to meet her parents.
Oh, wow.
So it was pretty serious.
Wow.
And shortly after, he was caught having an affair with an underage girl.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's creepy.
Yeah. After that, Teresita basically swore off romantic relationships because she was creeped out, and she probably was just like, I never want to do that again.
I understand.
Yeah. So after that, she just didn't date anymore. And Detective Joe Stahula was the detective that was appointed this case.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually a really well-known detective. He was known as like a no-nonsense cop, and he also had 85 honorable mentions. The first thing that he did was he got the autopsy report for Teresita, and it said that she had been choked and stabbed. It also said that she was a virgin, which was interesting to Joe because he noticed that when her body was found, she was splayed out and she was naked, so it almost seemed like she had been sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
But with the information coming back from the autopsy report that she was a virgin, it basically pointed out that she most likely had not been sexually assaulted, which was good. But then it kind of points to the question of like, was this sexual assault staged?
Yeah, and why would you want to stage that?
Yeah, why? Really weird. And once Detective Joe found that out, he went to the apartment to see if he could find any additional clues or evidence. Mm-hmm. And he went with his partner, and he was like, let's go talk to the neighbors and see if they know anything. And so they started talking to the neighbors, and the neighbors were like, we don't know anything. She was super private. She didn't really talk to us that much. But they did talk to the maintenance man, and the maintenance man had actually let the firefighters in the apartment that night. And she had 2 deadbolts and a chain lock. He unlocked the door for the firefighters.
What the hell?
Yeah. With the information that her door had been locked, they were able to determine that whoever was in her apartment was likely someone that she knew personally because she locked the door after.
Yeah. So, and I wonder how the person got out. I wonder if there was like a fire escape or what.
Like, how did they get out if the door was still locked?
Exactly.
When they looked around the apartment, it was a mess. There had been a fire, so obviously it wasn't going to be super clean. They found like a burned suitcase. They found beer cans that had been crushed and shoved under the couch.
Ooh. And she didn't drink, huh?
No, she didn't. They found sliced tomato on the counter, but they didn't find a knife. So they were like, oh, that must have been where the killer got the knife from.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
They did look at her address book because they were like, maybe there's some people in here that we can talk to.
Yeah.
And so they were flipping through the address book, taking down names and stuff. And as they were flipping through, they found a note that said, get concert tickets for AS. And they thought that that was super compelling, but they couldn't tie it to anybody in her address book.
Ooh.
Yeah. Honestly, they didn't come upon any major leads until they talked to some of her former co-workers at Edgewater Hospital. One of the people that they spoke to was a doctor that had spoken to Teresita on the night of her murder.
Oh my gosh.
They were talking around 7 p.m. and someone knocked on the door. The fire department actually came to her apartment around 8:40, so that leaves a little less than a 2-hour window between the time that she was speaking to the doctor and the time that she was killed. So that's a really short amount of time.
Yeah.
The doctor said that the person was there to buy concert tickets. And another hospital employee spoke with Teresita a little bit later that night. Her name was Ruth Loeb. She actually called around 8 p.m. to confirm lunch for the next day. And she said that Teresita sounded completely normal, that there was a guy there. And yeah, and so she was like, you can just call me back later if you want. The guy said something and Teresita giggled and then the phone call ended. So all the details that the detectives were able to gather from these phone calls, they basically assumed that Teresita must have let this person in, this man in, and she must have known him, you know?
Yeah.
She must have been at least somewhat familiar with him.
And like comfortable enough to be like joking around about something in her own home with this guy.
Yeah. They were also able to determine around what time he had been there, which would have been between 7:10 p.m. and 8:30 p.m.
Oh, okay.
But unfortunately, they just couldn't get any additional information. And so the case actually went cold. It was completely cold by the springtime.
Oh my god, that sucks. They were never able to find out who AS was?
Well, you'll see.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. The murder of Teresita had a huge impact on people, especially people at Edgewater Hospital.
Oh, yeah.
Like, her colleagues took it really hard because, like, can you imagine, even if it wasn't your friend, even if it was just someone you knew, like, that wouldn't be something that's easy to deal with. Like, somebody being killed in such a gruesome way, you know?
Yeah, someone you saw every day at work.
Yeah, exactly. One employee of Edgewater Hospital in particular was acting really strange, and her name was Richelieu. She worked as a respiratory therapist alongside Teresita.
Oh.
Even though they had the same job, they actually worked opposite shifts, so they didn't know each other super well.
Oh.
But Remy was acting really strange. For example, she was sitting in Teresita's lunch spot every day and humming little tunes, the same tune that Teresita would hum.
Ooh, that's kind of creepy.
I know.
And you said that they worked opposite schedules,
Yeah. Remy adopted a lot of Teresita's old habits, like talking about classical music and playing piano. And she even started using Teresita's old locker.
Ooh.
People were just disturbed by her behavior, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And some people even confronted her and they were like, why are you doing that?
And what did she say?
She wouldn't say anything. She would just shake it off.
Ooh, that's creepy.
Yeah. And one night, she was working at Edgewater Hospital, and she stood up aggressively, like, from her chair, and she ran out of the room. Like, as fast as she could, she ran out of the room. And later, she explained that the reason why she did that was because she saw Teresita.
What?
Yeah.
And she was the only one that apparently saw her?
Yeah. And the next day, she continued her impersonation of Teresita. Like, she just kept doing the same stuff that she was doing. And by this point, her coworkers were just like, this is too much. It's making us uncomfortable. We need to say something.
Yeah, it would make me uncomfortable too.
Yeah. And so they did. They went and they told management. Remy's boss actually called her into his office and he was like, hey girl, what's going on? Like, we need to figure this out because you're freaking people out and it's inappropriate, you know? She started freaking out on him. And she started saying that she hated her coworkers, that she hated her job, job. She
Oh,
hated her
okay.
working conditions. Yeah. And her boss was like, oh my gosh. He had never seen her like this before. So he was like, how about you take some time off? You know? Like, you could just take a little mini vacation, chill out for a bit, and then you can come back when you feel like you're ready to come back, you know?
Yeah.
She started freaking out on him even more. And she was like,
What?
I don't know if she was like cussing him out or what, but she started really losing it. And he ended up firing her for insubordination because he was just like, you're too much. You gotta go, girl.
Can I just say that's such an odd reaction
Oh my God. I
for
know.
her to have? I don't understand.
I know. And imagine if you were her boss, like you would just be like,
Yeah.
oh, this is awkward, but whatever. Despite being fired, Remy told her husband that she was happy she didn't have to work at the hospital anymore. And bake your baby to me. As if this story wasn't strange enough already, things are about to get even stranger.
Oh my god.
The same night that Remy was fired, she was sitting in the living room with her husband, Jose Chua, and he was actually a doctor, so I'll be referring to him as Dr. Chua.
Sorry, did they work in the same hospital since she was a respiratory therapist and he was a doctor?
I'm not 100% sure on that. He might have been like, what's it called? Like a...
One of those on call?
Yeah, or he could have been like a foot doctor or something with his own practice. I'm not really
Oh.
sure. But Remy is sitting in the living room with him. And after a few minutes of just sitting there, she leaves the room. And he's like, that's kind of odd.
Like, she doesn't say anything, she just gets up.
Yeah, she just gets up and leaves. He thought it was weird. So he stands up to go look for her. He gets up from his chair. He walks over to the bedroom and he finds her in there. But he's kind of shocked because when he sees her, she's just standing there and looking up at the ceiling, like as if she's in a trance.
Ooh.
And he's like, are you okay?
Ooh.
And that's when he really tripped out because she starts talking in a completely different voice than her own. What I mean by that is that she was speaking Tagalog in a Spanish accent. She did speak Tagalog, but she didn't speak it around him regularly.
What is Tagalog?
Tagalog is a Filipino dialect, so kind of like
Oh.
Spanish or...
Oh, a dialect. But she just didn't speak Tagalog around him that much?
Yeah, so she
Really?
she was speaking Tagalog in a Spanish accent, and he also said that her voice was not like her regular voice. Like, it sounded completely different, and so he was like...
That's creepy.
Yeah, and this is what she said to him. She said, my name is Teresita Basa. Dr. Chua, I would like to ask for your help to stop the person who killed me. And then Dr. Chua felt an aggressive push from behind towards his wife. And he was like, it's just the two of them. Like, and then she just kept saying, you need to help me, you need to help me. He said that the voice wasn't super creepy or anything. It just was unusual. And he said that it was actually pretty calm for the most part.
I just don't understand why Teresita's ghosts, if she's able to possess somebody to try and help solve her murder, why would she choose this random person that she didn't even interact with at work, considering she had close relationships with folks at Clearwater Hospital?
Yeah, Dr. Chua was really weirded out. And when Remy came out of this trance after saying that to him, all she said was, I'm really thirsty and I have a headache. And he was like, oh,
Ooh.
okay. He runs to the kitchen to grab her a glass of water and he runs back and he's like, here you go. And he's like, are you okay? Like, do you remember anything that just happened? And she was like, no. And he was like, okay.
Ooh, good.
Yeah.
That would be so creepy if your partner did that.
Oh my gosh, I know. And like, he's probably just thinking like, she is having a mental health crisis, you know?
Yeah, it's like she just got fired.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Yeah.
He doesn't really know if he believes it, so he's just like, all right, hopefully she's okay, you know?
Yeah.
But that wasn't the only strange thing that happened that night. Actually, just a little while after that, closer to midnight, I think it was like 11:40 p.m., they receive a phone call, and Dr. Chua answers, and the voice, whoever it was, says, hi, can I speak to Remy? And he's like, yeah. So he calls Remy over and Remy takes the receiver. She listens for a few minutes and then she abruptly hangs the phone up. And Dr. Chua's like, are you okay? What happened?
Oh my god.
And she's like, it sounded like it was a guy from my work. And he threatened me. He said that I'm next. Like, imagine being Dr. Chua. He's going through all this. His wife gets fired. She comes home. She's possessed. And then she's receiving threatening phone calls. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
You know?
And can I just say, if it is true, then that's dope that Teresita was able to go and do that, you know, like go in and try to seek help. But if it's not true, then that is just such a weird lie to do, to have such a tragedy happen and then try to make it about yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, she receives that call and they're like all freaked out and whatever.
That would be very scary. I would be losing my crap.
I would report that phone call immediately. It's like, why wasn't it reported?
Could it be reported back in the 70s, do you think?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can call the police and say hello.
You could just be like, hey, someone's threatening me on the phone. You know? Like 2 days later, Remy was on the phone with her realtor and she hung up the phone abruptly and she went back into this trance-like state and she started pleading with Dr. Chua immediately after she got off the phone, like after she hung up, and she was like, please, you have to go to the cops, like I need help, da-da-da-da-da. He ended up talking to his colleagues, and remember, he's a doctor and he didn't want to just like risk his career, so he talked to some people at work and he still didn't go to the cops because he just didn't feel super confident about all of it, you know?
Yeah.
The next day, though, he comes home from work and he walks into his bedroom and there's Remy. She's lying on the bed. She looks at him in the eye and he immediately knows that she's back in this trance-like state where she's possessed.
Ooh.
And she starts immediately pleading with him and she's like, why didn't you go to the cops? Why didn't you go to the cops? You're the only person that can help me. Please. He's getting fed up at this point because all of this is just hearsay, you know? Also, it's his wife, so I'm sure he probably felt conflicted about believing her story or not, you know? So she's pleading with him and he's like, all right, you know what? Like, I'm pretty fed up here. I'm just gonna ask her who killed Teresita and see what she says. And he's not expecting any kind of answer. But that's when the spirit goes on to say that her killer is named Alan Showery. Yeah. And that they worked together and that she trusted him and that she was friends with him and she had no reason to not trust him. And then she went on to explain the details of what happened that night. So Remy's possessed body, like by the spirit, goes on to say that she was strangled and then she was stabbed. Then she goes on to mention a few of Dr. Chua's family members, like his in-laws and stuff, which I'm like, Remy would just know that information, so how would that be Teresita's ghost? But then she starts saying, Alan Showery stole my jewelry, a pearl ring and a jade pendant necklace, and here are my family members that can verify that this is my jewelry.
Oh my god. Was this public knowledge, the details of the crime, where if Remy was faking this, she could have gotten it from the newspaper or something? Or no?
I don't think so. At least not about the jewelry. I don't think there's any way to know for sure, but I think it's also fair to assume that maybe she had something to do with it, you know?
Oh, that's how she knew.
Yeah. That was my thought, at least, because I'm just like, if you were a complete skeptic, like say you're agnostic and you don't believe in spirits or anything, or maybe you're just somebody who doesn't believe in ghosts at all, and this person is giving all of this information out about a case that they had nothing to do with, supposedly, I feel like I would automatically assume that they have something to do with it, you know?
Yeah.
But if you're a spiritual person, then it's like maybe you would lean more that way and be like, maybe it was her ghost. I don't know.
Yeah. I like your eyeshadow a lot also.
Oh, thank you.
Really cool.
I like your eyeshadow. Thank you. When Remy finally came to, she again said that she didn't remember anything that happened.
The trance. She didn't remember?
Yeah. Dr. Chua still didn't want to go to the cops because he was just like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't want to just go and accuse someone that I don't even know, especially if they're innocent, you know?
Exactly.
And it's still just hearsay, you know?
Yeah. And what's the proof?
Yeah, a ghost. That's not going to hold up in court. And especially because he's a doctor. He doesn't want to risk his career, you know?
Yeah, his credibility. It's not just, I'm going to go to the police. It's my whole career could be at stake.
Exactly. Yeah, so he doesn't. But get this, Remy is actually the one to file the report and the information. She calls the Filipino consulate, and the consulate redirects her over to the Chicago police headquarters, where she talks to this guy, and the guy is like, you should make a report about this. Just give him all you have because it's still a murder case. And he actually went on to do his own mini investigation because he was like, this isn't interesting. I don't really
Is
know.
he just like a cop or what?
Maybe, or maybe like an armchair detective. I don't know for sure.
Okay.
But he went on to do his own little investigation, and he talked to a couple of people that worked at Edgewater Hospital that knew Teresita. And he spoke to 3 individuals, and all 3 of them said that they had also seen Teresita's ghost. And that she had pleaded with them to go to the cops and tell them everything.
Did they also receive the same message that it was Alan that did it?
I'm not sure. He spoke to them and they said that she begged them for help, but they didn't want to go to the cops because they just didn't know. So I don't know. Dr. Chua actually did make a report, but he didn't make a report about Remy's possession experience. He made a report about the phone call that they received that same night. And he said that the person that called on the phone sounded like somebody that worked at Edgewater Hospital named Alan Chowry.
How would he know that?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird. He said that he heard Alan Chowry's voice at the hospital when he was there one time. And he said when he answered the phone, it sounded like him. But I'm like, that's kind of suspicious just because, like, if somebody called me on my phone and they were like, hey, can I talk to Kathy? I would pass you the phone. But I don't think that I would immediately be able to know, like, who the voice belongs to unless it was somebody I knew.
You heard him one time talking at the hospital and your memory is so good that you can remember it and it matches a voice. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. And I don't want to point fingers at anybody because the truth of the matter is we don't know for sure, but I think it's fair to speculate, you know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the whole shebang finally got back to our good old Detective Joe Stahula from the beginning of the case, who was first appointed Teresita's case. And he was like, I gotta look into this, you know? This was actually the first time that he had heard the name Alan Chowry, so he was compelled to look into this further. And he decided to go visit Remy and Dr. Chua, and he found out that they had actually moved. And when he got there, he was like, hey guys, and they were like, yeah, we moved because of the phone call. And she said that this phone call really freaked her out, and she started talking about Alan Chowry and how he liked to be referred to as a doctor. Like, his nickname was Doc, and he also received his mail, like, to the hospital, like Edgewater Hospital. It was his mail was sent there. It was sent to Dr. Alan Chowry.
But he wasn't a doctor.
No, he wasn't.
What the heck?
And so she's basically just giving him all this information about Alan. And then she goes on to talk about her relationship with Teresita. She just basically told Detective Joe that they went to orientation together and then they worked opposite shifts. So she was like, yeah, I don't really know her. She went on to say that the night that Teresita was murdered, she was working and she saw the case on the news. And right after this, Detective Joe notices that Dr. Chua's body language is really weird. He's like hunched over and he's like rubbing his... I would assume that's what it looks like. Like, he's like hunched over and he's like rubbing his hands and he just seems like really anxious.
Ooh.
Detective Joe is like, what's going on, buddy?
Why are you acting sketchy?
That's when Dr. Chua was like, hey, do you believe in paranormal stuff? And Detective Joe is like, I'm open-minded. Dr. Chua was like, I'm gonna be honest with you, dude. My wife has been possessed by Teresita for the past week.
What did Joe say?
I think he was just like, oh.
Yeah, he was like, he probably didn't want to jeopardize further information by being like, yeah, I'm a skeptic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so he just let Dr. Chua talk about it. Dr. Chua was like, I didn't want to go to the cops because I didn't want to falsely accuse somebody of murder. And also, I'm a doctor, so
yeah,
I didn't want to, like, jeopardize my career by coming to the cops or anything.
Yeah.
Does this make you uncomfortable? Me?
No, that hurt.
Her. And then he went on to explain Remy's behavior
Mm-hmm.
and how her voice would change.
Ooh.
That she would go into like a trance and she would start speaking Tagalog, which she never spoke at home. He just did his best to try to tell Detective Joe exactly what was happening. He also went on to explain that when he would disagree with the voice, it would get louder and more aggressive, and when he did agree with it, it would be calm and cool and collected.
That's eerie.
He even went on to tell Detective Joe that the spirit had told them about Alan Chowry and about how Alan Chowry was the one to steal Teresita's jewelry, the pearl ring and the jade pendant necklace.
Oh my...
Detective Joe is like, this is the first time I've heard about any of that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
They told told him everything that they knew. And afterwards, Dr. Chua was like, do you believe me? Detective Joe was like, I can't say that I do, but I can't say that I don't. The one thing that kind of sucked about this situation was that Detective Joe was there alone. He wasn't there with his partner. So all of this information was information he was collecting on his own. Detective Joe said he had one last question for them. And he said, once you did go to the police and make these reports, did you have any more visits from Teresita? And Dr. Chua was like, no, we haven't had any other visits since we went to the police. Was it because the ghost left, or was it because, like, I just don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So Detective Joe, he went back to his office and he decided to thumb through Teresita's file. And he's filing through it, and he comes across a note that he completely forgot about, which was the note that said, get concert tickets for AS. Finally, all these dots are connecting. He's like, AS, Alan Showery, like, there's a connection there.
Yeah.
He's like, let's look into this. And so they start researching Alan Showery. They look at his prior record, and they find that he had charges for theft, burglary, and sexual assault. The strangest thing about this is Alan Showery was never even on the radar until they heard about this possession, you know?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like he wasn't even a suspect at all. And now he's the main focus. And
because a ghost, apparently.
yeah, because of a ghost. Yeah, and they also find that Alan had lived just a block away from Teresita's apartment.
Oh my gosh.
So they're like, this is just adding up, you know?
Yeah.
So they have all this information on Alan, and they decide to track him down. And they go to his house one night. He opens the door. First thing he says to them is, are you here about Teresita? Yeah.
Ooh.
And they're immediately like,
red flag.
Yeah, red flag. Detective Joe is just kind of looking at him, taking him all in. And right away, he's like, this guy, there's no way this guy is a murderer. He had put away a lot of murderers before. And for some reason, with Alan, he was just like, I just don't see it. I don't know why, but he was just like, I don't see it. And he had beautiful brown eyes, a beautiful smile. He was well groomed. He was really friendly, and he invited them in. Basically, they were like, hey, can we take you back to the station so we can ask you some questions? Like, are you cool with that? And he was like, yeah, of course, let me just run upstairs and change. So he runs upstairs to change his clothes, and they're downstairs with his wife, and his wife's name is Yanka, and she's pregnant. They're just talking to her, and she's super friendly as well, very compliant. They end up, all four of them, going back to the station so they can ask Alan some questions. On their way there, they decide to give Alan the silent treatment, and they actually do this on purpose so that they can see if he'll talk about Teresita at all. And he does. He starts talking about her right away, and he's like, she's so friendly, like she doesn't have an enemy in the world. He starts talking about how they're really, really good friends, and that they take the bus to work together, and they're just super close.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that she even would invite him over for beers sometimes, for him to go over and have a drink with her, basically. But she didn't drink, remember?
She didn't drink. And there were beer cans found under her couch.
Yep. Basically, he was like, I'll help you any way that you need me to help out. Because he seemed like he really wanted to help the detectives. So they were like, all right, let's go into an interrogation room. They start asking him questions. And one of the questions they asked was, when was the last time that you saw Teresita? And he said that he hadn't seen her for 6 months.
6 months, but they worked together.
And they were friends. Joe immediately is like, you just told us that you were really good friends with her, so... And that's when he finally came forward, and he basically said that he was helping Teresita with her TV, because her TV was broken, and he had actually gone over to her house. That he was working on repairing her TV, but he forgot some of his tools, so he went home to grab them. And when he got home, he started working on electrical wires at his own house, and he forgot to go back to her house, and he just stayed at home.
What the heck?
Yeah, and then detectives again were like, that doesn't really add up. Can you just tell the truth now, please?
Ooh.
And he's like, I'm telling the truth. You can go ask my wife. And so they talked to Yanka, his wife, his pregnant wife. And she's like, yeah, he did get home around 8, and I was out shopping. But he wouldn't have been working on her house because he doesn't do stuff like that.
Oh.
Yeah, and they're like, And as she's explaining this, she's moving her hands around a lot. I'm assuming she's more expressive, so she's like talking.
She's talking with her hands.
Yeah. And Detective Joe Stahula notices that on her finger she has a pearl cocktail ring. He's like, that looks interesting. So he asks her about it, and she's like, oh yeah, Alan gave this to me as a late Valentine's Day present. And if you remember, Teresita got murdered on February 21st.
Wow.
Yeah. Detective Joe's like, that's weird. Can I see that? Like, is it cool if I look at that for a second? And she's like, yeah. And then he's like, can I see your other jewelry? And she's like, yeah, let me go get it. So I think she goes home and grabs her jewelry box. And she gives it to Detective Joe. He's looking through it, and guess what he finds? A jade pendant necklace. He's like, I'm pretty sure this doesn't belong to you. And she's like, yeah, no, it doesn't. He's like, this is Teresita's.
Oh my god.
And he's actually able to confirm, like, shortly after that it was hers. He ended up talking to her relatives, and they were able to confirm that it was hers. Yeah, and so he's like, that's sketchy. And so he goes back in the interrogation room, and he's like, Alan, where did you get this? And Alan is like, oh, I got it from this guy down the street for $20. Detective Joe is like, you're lying, dude. This isn't the first time you've lied during this interrogation. Like, it's time for you to tell the truth.
Seriously.
And so he's like, all right, fine. I'll tell you the truth of what happened that night. But I need to talk to my wife, Yanka, first. They let Yanka into the interrogation room so that she can talk to Alan. And she comes in, and he's like, babe, I love you, but, like, I did something horrible. And I just, like, I want you to start a new life without me. And you deserve so much better. And she's, like, heartbroken. Like, all of a sudden, she's like, oh, my God, what happened? And she's like, no, please let me help you. And he's like, no, you need to leave. He's like, I don't want to see you again. Just forget me. That's what he said. That's when Alan starts to tell the detectives all of the details of what happened that night from his own personal point of view.
Oh.
So Teresita had him over to fix her TV. So that part was true. He was over there, and he realized that he forgot tools. So that part's true as well. So he was like, I gotta go home and pick up some of my tools. And he had to pick up some electrical diagrams so that he could fix her TV properly. Before that, he was like, let's sit down. We could just talk and have a couple drinks and stuff. And so he was just sitting with Teresita. They were just sitting and talking and having a good time and chatting it up. And then he was like, all right, I'm gonna go get those electrical diagrams. I'll be back. And so he leaves. He had actually been helping Teresita with her citizenship. He would ride the bus with her to the immigration office. Basically, she would tip him every single time.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, dang, she's rich. Like, she must have money. So on his way home to pick up these electrical diagrams, he was like, I think I'm gonna rob her because she's rich. Maybe I can get some good money. That was his choice for the night, apparently. So he goes back. When he gets to her apartment, she locks the door behind him, and she's on the phone. Once she's off the phone, he grabs her from behind, he chokes her, drags her into her bedroom, and strips her, and then he stabs her, and then he puts the mattress on top of her body, and then lights the house on fire. And then he's searching around, trying to find what he can take. All he finds is $30 and some of her jewelry. And so he takes that, and he leaves. And he tried to make the apartment look like it was ransacked as well, so he made a huge mess on purpose.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
And imagine Teresita's mom and dad just all the way in the Philippines having to hear about all of this. That's horrible.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking about too. Your one child is in the US, and this horrible thing happens. Can't imagine.
Yeah.
Detective Joe decided to ask about the jewelry at that point, and Alan said that he threw most of it away, but he did give the pearl ring and the necklace to his wife Yanka. And he said that that's all that he kept, and it was around 3 a.m. when the assistant state attorney wrote down the entire confession, and Alan signed it. When this case hit the media, it was huge, and it was actually popularized to the point that it was on the news all over the world, not just in the US, but all over the world. When it did hit the news, they left out the part that all of this information came from a ghost. And so that's actually where Alan's defense team decided to dig in. His lawyer, he wanted Alan to forget his confession completely. He actually wanted Alan to plead not guilty. So Alan's trial began in 1979. Because of the mysterious circumstances of the case, the legal teams were just battling it out. Like, they had a really hard time coming to any kind of conclusion. essentially they ended up relying on a jury. Just a little bit more about Alan, just so you can kind of know about his background a little more. He was an orderly at Edgewater Hospital, but if you remember, he liked to say that he was a doctor.
Yeah.
But the extent of his medical knowledge came from when he was in the hospital for a few months after a work-related injury. So he was there for like 3 months, I think. He ended up getting a settlement from that injury of $12,000.
Oh, wow.
So he wasn't a doctor, but he did have some knowledge about, I guess, hospitals and stuff because of that.
Yeah, since he spent so long in one.
Yeah, and when he got the settlement, he spent it on a car and clothes and photography equipment. He would also say that he was a veteran, and that was a lie too. When he was charged, multiple women stepped forward and said that they had romantic relationships with him, and a few even said that they were in love with him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and remember,
multiple women.
Yeah, and remember he has a wife, and his wife is pregnant. Yeah, well, that's not the only thing. He also had a wife and a child that he abandoned in Alabama when he moved to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He also would sell jewelry at the hospital, but the jewelry that he sold was stolen. The security people that worked at the hospital heard that Alan would steal jewelry from the patients and sell it to Edgewater employees.
Oh my God. Like patients that were like in a coma or just like out of it or something?
Probably.
That's so creepy.
Probably, like, all of them, probably. And this actually made it difficult for the legal team to defend him because there was just so much stuff, like, stacked up against him. He just was not the best guy in the world. Like I said, ultimately, they had to rely on a jury for the conclusion of the case. Because it was so popular, when the case began in 1979, there were newspaper reporters that filled the courtroom to the point that there were news reporters in almost every seat. And the trial began, the jury was seated and everything, and then all of a sudden all of the reporters started leaving the courtroom, and they went downstairs. You know why? Because they went down to John Wayne Gacy's trial downstairs.
Dang.
Yeah, so the courtroom was full, and then all of a sudden it was empty. So the trial began, and because they had to rely on a jury, they tried to do everything they could to on both sides to show the circumstances of the case. They really didn't have any physical or otherwise evidence against Alan other than this ghost confession. There was no physical evidence. His fingerprints weren't at the crime scene. His fingerprints weren't even on the knife. So they just didn't really have a whole lot. This is where the case, to me at least, gets a little more sticky. Remy was called to the stand for questioning. She said that she wasn't very familiar with Teresita, but she was familiar with Alan, and this is new information. This hadn't been mentioned yet. She was familiar with him, and they had 2 shifts together. Yeah, so they were pretty familiar. The defense asked Remy about her ghost possessions, and she said that all she remembered was that she was cold, thirsty, and she was hearing the name Alan Showery, that she didn't remember anything outside of that. And then they asked her about her side hustle.
What was it?
She sold jewelry to her fellow employees. In fact, she sold jewelry to Alan. She sold him a diamond ring that he ended up not being able to afford, so he gave it back to her.
Oh my God.
But she had a thing for selling jewelry, which is interesting. The defense brought up Teresita's ring and asked Remy if she was the one who sold it to Alan. She said no. And they were like, okay, well then, were you the one that sold the pendant? And she said no. And then the defense asked her if she murdered Teresita, and she said no.
Ooh, that's such a trip, because then that would make sense why she would know about the jewelry, you know, like when she was possessed.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so creepy.
And then they asked Alan to the stand, and he testified that he didn't kill her and that he actually went to his neighbor's house that night.
Oh, so he changed his plea.
Yeah, he changed his story completely.
Wow.
And he said that his wife Yanka was with him that night.
Oh.
And which doesn't add up because she said that she was shopping, if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
He had also said that the cops interrogated him that night, but he was really, really drunk and that he felt incompetent to talk to the cops or anything like that. And he said that the cops threatened him and said that Yanka would be going to jail too if he didn't confess. And he was like, I don't want my pregnant wife in prison, you know?
And also, like, how they took his confession at, like, 3 a.m., you know? Like, that's just so wild, because you hear of cops all the time just, like, interrogating people and coercing them, you know, and stuff like that, breaking them down.
Which is also interesting to me, because if you remember, Detective Joe Stahula said that he didn't look like a murderer at all.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a hard time believing it.
That's a really good point.
Like, I just don't understand that. Yanka actually backed up Alan's story and said that she did visit the neighbor's house that night with Alan, which again doesn't make sense because she was supposedly shopping.
Yeah.
And they checked with the neighbor. The neighbor said that they didn't remember at all. That they remembered that they came over, but that they couldn't remember what night it was. Yeah, so they couldn't definitively say that Alan and Yanka visited that specific night.
Oh.
And on top of that, Alan and Yanka wouldn't even make eye contact in court.
Oh my god. Like, they were trying to hide something, you think?
Maybe. Or maybe they were avoiding eye contact because Alan kept making eye contact with another woman in court. She had a red coat on and she was beautiful. Oh. And they kept smiling at each other and making eyes at each other.
Oh my god.
It turns out that she was somebody who worked at Edgewater Hospital that he had, like, a little relationship with.
Oh my god.
Yeah. With all of that being said, the jury couldn't come to a conclusion. 4 of them thought that he wasn't guilty. 4 of them thought that he was. And 4 of them didn't know.
So it was an inconclusive jury?
Yeah, it was inconclusive, which led to a mistrial.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So he got out?
I think he stayed until his next trial began. It was actually on the 2-year anniversary of Teresita's murder.
Oh, wow.
He's sitting in jail and he's like, I need to talk to my legal team. Nobody knows what happened in this conversation and I really wish I could find out.
Oh.
But he calls them. Shortly after that, they go back to court and he changes his plea again. So for a second time, he changes his plea back to guilty.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, just randomly. And nobody knows why. Nobody knows what happened during that conversation. Like, nobody knows anything about that. This was against the advice of his legal team.
They told him not to.
Yeah.
That's so weird. I wonder why he changed his mind.
Yeah. And because of that, Alan was convicted to 14 years in prison, which was the minimum sentence in Illinois at the time.
Wow.
He ended up only serving 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And then he got out. But still, nobody knows why he changed his plea. Nobody knows what happened or why it was on the anniversary of her death. Like, nobody knows exactly what happened, you know?
Yeah.
Nobody will even talk about this case anymore. Like, nobody who worked on the case will talk about it.
Wow.
The only thing against him was his confession. So if that was true, then that makes sense. Why couldn't they find anything else on him? Like, especially like his fingerprints on the knife or maybe on the beer cans or the locks or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was no physical evidence at all. Remy and Dr. Chua decided that they didn't want any attention from this case. Like, they refused to talk to reporters or anything like that. And they told reporters that they didn't want any attention from it. Oh. But then they went on to write a whole book about the case.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, those two are so sketch. I feel like they had something to do with it.
I feel like they did too. I don't want to like point fingers, but I kind of feel like they had something to do with it maybe.
Yeah, and it's such a tragic, disgusting case that I feel like why would you want to make yourself a part of it if you didn't have something to do with it? If you weren't trying to cover up your tracks. Like, he didn't know Alan, and she was, you know, with this little side business that she had. I don't know. It's just weird.
Just
sketchy
sketchy.
Case, yeah.
Yeah. After this, Detective Joe Stahula started getting made fun of at work, actually. Like, people thought that he was ridiculous for ever even believing it.
Wow.
And, yeah, that's the end of the case. So.
Wow. That was wild.
Yeah, it's really sad. But, yeah, that is the end of the case.
That was so interesting and insane.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We would grab our dogs, but our dog Spinky has a back injury right now, so we can't pick him up without him getting hurt. So we're trying to be super gentle with him.
Yeah.
But they say hi.
They say hi. We could insert a picture.
We'll insert a picture here.
Hi. Hello.
Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
And comment.
And make a little comment if you want. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.